Okay? What you've done since you've gotten hired helps us decide whether we want to keep you here. And so I think the emphasis really needs to be on what you've done since you've been at the university. Now, that doesn't mean what you've done before is not important, but in terms of the kind of prominence that you give it in your file, I think the focus...
That's for tenure, but for promotion, if you've done 4 years at assistant at another university...
You're right.
And you're coming up here with 1 year,
yeah.
You want to show what you did in the 4 years elsewhere.
Yeah. Thank you.
That's what I wanted
true.
to just clarify.
Yeah. Marianne?
No, you're.
Are you all set?
Thank you, Doris.
Thank you. Thank you to Mike and Bill and especially David and Doris and Linda for organizing this, and thank you for inviting me to participate this year, and all the deans are here, that are 4 academic deans, because as you have pointed out, the whole process, evaluation process from the collective bargaining agreement to the Senate documents have really been arrived at by a process of shared governance. And so that means the administration has a role as well as the faculty. And so that's why we're really pleased to be here, and we hope that this will become a regular part of how we do business. David, I just want to, some of the things that David said, I think bear reiteration, and even though you've read them 100 times, they're still really, really important. Or maybe it was Bill that said it, quoting from the Senate documents, that the singular criterion is academic excellence. I don't think we can say that often enough. And that academic excellence is evidenced by or documented by the quality of the activities that faculty perform in each of the 4 areas. This whole process is really one of the most important things and one of the most critical things you do as a faculty and an administration, as a shared governance entity. You were hired here at Southern because we all believed, the fact your peers and the administration believed that you had the potential to be effective and productive teachers, scholars, and colleagues. And so we know that you have that potential, and the evaluation process is really to, in some ways, measure whether you've lived up to that potential, and also collegially, the renewal process is really built to collegially move you to that end. And so I guess in education terms, I would look at renewal process as being formative assessment for those of you that know the lingo. The tenure review is really a summative evaluation, if you will. So let me just mention a couple of things, and they may seem random. I was kind of taking notes as David and Doris were talking. Let me first of all thank the P&T committee, the current P&T committee, and anybody who's ever served on a P&T committee. It's an incredible amount of work. It's intense, it's stressful, and it comes in the middle of the winter. It's a terrible time, but it's really one of the most important things that faculty do. And it really is what keeps our American system of higher education and peer review keeps it going. So it's a really, really important. So thank you to all of you that serve in that capacity. Your file is how you tell your story, and I think a couple of people have said that. And so it really presents you to people that may not know you, and people from different disciplines who may not be familiar with your discipline. So keep that in mind as you're preparing your file. You have this document that talks about kind of the nitty-gritty about how to put your file together. And I just want to point out that I want to make a distinction between things that are mandatory, that must be in your file, things that you must do. Those are things that come from either the collective bargaining agreement or the Senate document. And they are so noted in that purple document. They say mandatory. And then there are other, like the 3-inch binder, that's mandatory. There are other things that are strongly recommended or that a reasonable person putting together a file to be read by a committee of 15 people would be a really good idea for you to do, like using the non-glare sleeve and so on. Now, in that PowerPoint that you saw, there was, I don't know, about 30 slides, and there was one slide that said the role of the provost. And so but I read, the PNC committee and I read every single file. Nobody else reads every single file. It's just read at the department or at the school level. So that is, as you can imagine, a lot of work. And so I think I speak for the committee when I say that anything you can do to make our work easier is a good thing. And one of those things is really organizing your file well. In every department, you've got colleagues who know how to put together a fabulous file. And I'm sure they would be happy to mentor you if you have any questions about that. One of the things that Mike mentioned in the context of teaching, what do we look for? We look for reflective practitioners. I would extend that to your entire file, your entire way that you put together and talk about your performance in those 4 areas, and that is reflectively. And really, if you ask me what I look for in a file, that's the first thing I look for. The first thing I read, this is how I read a file. I look at the candidate information form and the CV. Actually, I find the CV more useful than the candidate information form, although I understand the need to have a standardized format for when you're looking at that many files. Then I read your introductory statement, and although that's not required, I would strongly urge you to have an introductory statement that kind of talks about you, who you are, your career, what it is that is your passion, what are the things that you've done really well, what are the, maybe some of the bumps you've had, how does it all fit into, and your role here at Southern, and how that may have evolved. And I find that really, really useful. And then I go, and I hope that you have, as Doris mentioned, introductory statements in all 4 of the areas that are not just summaries of what you've done. I don't want to see the summaries of what you've done because I see it. I've got the file in front of me. I've got your CV. What I want to see is, what does that mean? Help me interpret what I'm reading in your file. What is it? Mike talked wonderfully about your teaching. What is your teaching philosophy? What have you done to make changes in your teaching? How has your teaching evolved? What have you found out about yourself as a teacher based on your students' performance, feedback from colleagues, feedback from students, and what have you done to make changes? And how has that worked out for you? Have the changes worked? Have they not worked? How have you adjusted your teaching? The same thing in creative activity. I really want to know, what is your passion? What are the things that you are intellectually curious about, and what have you done about that? What is your research agenda, or what is your creative activity agenda? How has that changed? What are your plans? Have you accomplished what you set out to accomplish, and so on? And the same thing about service. What's important to you? Do you just put your name out there for any committee because you know you've got to have committees on your CV? I hope not. I hope that you have a plan in terms of your service to the university, as well as your professional attendance service. So I think those things are really important. And then I go and I look at the evidence that you present in each of the 4 areas in your file. And then, once I've finished reading all the files, I meet with the Promotion Tenure Committee, and we meet for at least 2 hours, and we really talk about I try to understand where the committee may be coming from in reaching certain decisions, and I ask any questions that I have about files. So it's pretty intense and intensive. I don't sleep much during that month. It's really, I know that it's a very important process, and I take it very seriously, as does everybody. that's involved in the process. Okay, let me see. Oh, no such thing as early tenure, okay? Doris mentioned that, and by our collective bargaining agreement, there's no such thing as early tenure. However, when you apply for tenure, regardless of when you apply for it, the same standard holds. So you don't get a pass because you're applying early, or you don't get a pass because you waited until the last minute either. It's the same standard of academic excellence. Okay. The 3-ring binder, you got to do it, but think about what you want to present in those supplementary binders. Do you really need to have 4 supplementary binders? Do you really expect the committee to read all of those 4 supplementary binders? I confess, I do. If you give me 4 binders, I will probably not read all of them. I do promise to read your primary file, every page of it. I do not promise to read your supplementary files. So what I'd like is for you to be judicious in how you present those files and make reference to what's important in those files in your primary file. So you may want to say, here's an abstract of this article, but this is really important to this to the way that I'm presenting my research, and so please see it, the entire thing in my supplementary binder, or something like that. Okay. Let me talk, this was alluded to a couple of times, about load activity for the first category. Remember, it's not just teaching. It's whatever you get load credit for. So if you get load credit for reassigned time or research, there needs to be some accounting of that for that in your section 1. Okay? If you get reassigned time to be chair of grad council or to chair prac or to whatever, even if it's in service, you need to account for that in category 1. That's very important. The committee doesn't, and myself, doesn't always know what you've done. We can't always make assumptions. Some of your roles may be very public, so we may have some idea of what you've done, but in many cases we don't. And you have to apply that same reflected practitioner criterion, I think, to all of your non-teaching duties that get load credit as well. And in some cases, you might have to get creative. Because how do you evaluate your role as NMC chair? Okay? How do you let the promotion and tenure committee know how important that role was, how much work you put into it, how your performance was perceived by your peers, your effectiveness in that role, and so on. I've seen the chairperson is another one, and having been a chair myself, I remember preparing my file, I really struggled with how to present myself for the work that I did. I was getting 9 credits to be a department chair, so that's 75% of my load activity. That's a pretty heavy responsibility that needs to be presented and documented in evidence. And so you may think about, there are surveys out there, for example, that can be filled out anonymously by faculty, by students. You need to talk about what your management style is. What is the role of a chairperson? How do you lead the department? How do you manage the department? How do you facilitate the work of your colleagues as department chair? There's many different ways you can approach it. And I think the same goes for your leadership and university service activities that give you reassigned time credit. So I don't know if anybody, you can feel free to stop me for questions now. Maybe
Actually,
this is the time.
I'd like to say 2 things you said that are really good. One is what Marianne was saying about the introductory sections. I think it's helpful. Another way to think about this is like when you applied for the job. You made an argument for why they should hire you in the letter, and the facts are already in the CV. So think of the file information as the facts. You don't need to repeat that. What you want to do is make an argument, tell the story about why you should be hired or why you should be tenured or why, right? I mean, because that's, so you want to interpret those facts for someone. So that's one thing to think of. Just think of an analogy to a job search. The other thing that Marianne said about the reassigned time, if you get anything that you get reassigned time for has to, in a sense, count in category 1. And I don't know, I think she may agree with me on this, but I know when I was on P&T for many, many years, 12, 13, 14 years, we would often take into account the fact that any reassigned time you got, not any, usually the reassigned time you get to do whether it's research or service isn't enough to do all that research or service. So that it doesn't mean you can't put that work in category 2 or category 3. You might feel like, I feel like I'm cheating if I double dip. But I think in this idea of explaining, the part we're just talking about, the letter, the introductory part, you might explain, I know you saw this in category 1, I mentioned my article because I got reassigned time to do it, but I'm putting it here because it, many of us find that if you get reassigned time, what you do is teach well for one semester because you're not 9 credits of teaching. And then you might really get to that article over the summer or over the winter break. So in a sense, you're allowed to, as long as you explain things, I think you don't have to worry about, will I get in trouble for doing something? Many times people have questions like that kind of thing. And I would just say, keep in mind that if you're trying to be transparent and explain something, then I think you will get the benefit of the doubt from almost everybody.
I agree with Mike on that. I think there's certainly, I can think of, well, I think probably almost all of you in the work that you do in reassigned time doesn't, I would say probably 85% of the time doesn't cover the time that it actually takes to do the job. And so I absolutely agree with Mike on that. But it must show up in category 1.
Right.
Then you can make the case for why it should also be in category 2 or 3, depending on what the activity is. Clay? I actually don't care, but I'll let someone from the committee.
Most people use every piece, every document is in a sheet, two pages of one. Except the one reason for a supplementary file, for example, would be so you put this year's evaluation, the primary file, the last 4 years. Most of them have to be.
And another way to do it would be to put
Plastic sheet.
your summaries of your student evaluations in the primary file and actually have those comments in the, so but I think Dave is right, you don't need to put all of those in it.
One thing I would say, Clay, one thing I don't, which really holds me up, is if you have a whole bunch of things stapled together in one sleeve, because then
Then you have to
whether
pull
it's,
it out.
yeah.
And then unless like you say something about that, very Craig, you want to provide a so you said you only have the data information.
And at the deliberation.
So you want us to explain our sign time, but if you're putting that in the low presentation, you have to box like 2 pages, so we go down first. Is that okay?
Those, I think in the Word document, those boxes.
They
Right,
can
if
be
you're
in.
okay with the fact that you're going to have a giant paragraph and half a page.
Yeah, so you have to use your judgment to say more than 3 credits research reassignment.
Just want to make sure that I
That would be my point would be just to say more than 3 credits research reassignment. The name of the project, something descriptive.
but not a page long.
But really, it's up to you. You have a page, and Marianne mentioned something that may have been said before. It's important that there are 15 people on the committee, and most who would be in your field would be 2. I think the maximum for each department would be 2 people on the committee. They can't say anything in the deliberation, so you have to write in a way that's accessible to everyone. It's something that a CSU grant application emphasizes. That is right. Subject matter generalist.
Yeah.
So let Jim, Armin, and
Mike-
Christie,
Mike,
I know you
before-
might want to speak, I'm just saying, I want to
Okay,
acknowledge
Jim
that we
will-
see those
Jim will
people.
do that. Okay.
Jim, Armin, Chris, and Zach had their hands up, that's all. You can talk.
Before we go on, just to make sure I don't forget, I just want to say to you, digital measures, your bars, I'm going to put in a plug here. if you have backfilled your FAR so that your entire CV is in your FAR, we now have a report that you can generate. You can generate your candidate information form from what's in digital measures just by pushing a button. So now, I don't know about, the reassigned time won't get explained clearly, so you will have to go, and then you can edit it. Once you download the report, you may have to go in and edit and embellish certain areas. But Jess, I'm actually holding, Jess, I have to say thank you to Jess. She agreed to be a guinea pig to let us use her CV to see how the process worked. And it works very well. We may have to do a little bit of tweaks, but yes, Rebecca. No, I'm sorry, no. But anyway, so I just want you to know that's out there. If you need any help with that, Maureen Gilbride in the Assessment and Planning Office would be happy to assist you in backfilling your FARs to get all your information into digital measures. And the actual, the template is 5 pages, but once you start filling it in, obviously it's going to go, especially if you've got a lot of creative activity or service, it's going to go beyond the 5 pages. So that's fine, it just automatically expands, right? Okay, I'm sorry.
No, you don't have to
Jim.
apologize. Seriously, I was only letting you know who was up. But if you want to say more,
No,
okay.
that's enough for
Jim?
now, Jim. Did you forget what you were going to say?
Yeah, pretty much.
That's my strategy, if we wait long
It
enough.
worked.
I think I forgot to apply for the part. Anyways, what if your work is very highly involved with respect to the 4 basic categories, so that activities that you do might be looked at as research activities. A large part of it is leveraging learning on the part of students, because you're doing it with students and vice versa. Student activities end up producing creative activities that then also ends up being a good to the community, to the state, etc. And I kind of think I know the answer to that, but
You tell your story, so I think you have to make that case. I hope that many of us are doing that. I mean, if you're talking about engaged teaching and engaged scholarship, that's exactly what it is. So it's up to you. And I think, again, whatever you're getting low credit for, you have to start the discussion in category 1, but then how it bleeds over into other areas, I think is up to you. Who was next? Armin, I think?
With regard to low credit for chair and directors and all those positions, it's important to be able to explain what you did and get evidence from people that you work with. But you also have to realize that some people are not eligible to write something about your work. For instance, the most obvious case is your dean. If
That's right.
chair,
That's right.
the dean probably knows a lot more about the quality
That's
of work.
true.
But you're assuming if you do a good job that she's going to.
What
But if
Armin is
you're-
saying, for those who can't hear, is that you always want to get evidence for the work you've done, especially service, but there are certain constrictions in the Senate document where your dean can't write a separate letter from the letter they wrote for you already, or the provost can't have a letter in there for you. So there are certain, you just want to know which ones those are.
But what you can do is present the kind of evidence in your file that your dean will then say, this guy's a great chair and this is what he's done, and you know what I mean? In the
quote the dean.
give the dean some hints in your file, right? Do you know who was
It
next?
was Chris
Mike?
was next, then Steve, Zach, and
Jeff.
then
Do you include the narrative about the reflection and things like that in the candidate information form?
No,
itself?
in your file.
no.
You would start, the way I would do it, after my CV, in my primary binder, I would have my general statement, and then at the beginning of each of the 4 sections in my binder, I would have my reflective statement about each of the areas. They have read your file, they have taken voluminous notes on your file, but when they sit down to deliberate, they do not have your file in front of them. Is that correct, David?
Yes.
Okay.
that would take forever.
Yeah.
Zach?
Jeff.
Oh, I'm sorry, it's Jeff. You look like Zach. I'm so sorry. Okay, sorry.
Just out of curiosity, if you are a chair, how do you deal with that letter just get dropped?
There's no chair letter.
Chair letter.
Correct.
Chair letter was decided by the
Yep, yep.
Mark?
Lee.
Are the documents that's not placed in the file
Well, you can generate your CV from your card if you have put all your stuff in there. There's a button you can push and get your CV. There's another button you can push and get your candidate information. Yes. Hopefully, I mean, my goal, and I think David shares this goal with me, is that eventually this whole process will be online, and that digital measures will be the vehicle for that. Yeah. Who was next?
Braxton and then Dana.
Yes,
Absolutely.
absolutely. That's actually a great thing to do. Yeah.
And then the second one, if you have something, I'll use my example, I'm writing in pencil, I don't expect you to read that.
Thank you.
But should I still put it in the
Yeah,
supplement file? I mean, that's
absolutely.
gonna take up,
Yeah, supplementary.
okay.
That's why it's a
That's
supplementary.
okay. That's why it's supplementary.
just to
Yeah.
show it there, and I don't expect you to open it.
Yes.
Right.
Yes.
So that's very good.
Yes. That would be good.
Because
Dana?
we and here judge a book by its cover. We only look at the cover. We don't look at it.
Dana. Well, I think it would be, that's one way of documenting your effectiveness, especially in some of those hard to document areas, like service, for example. You may ask a colleague who served on a committee with you to talk about your effectiveness on that committee. I think in your creative activity, you may have a colleague from outside the university that you may ask to comment on your work, on your research, for example. So there's lots of different ways you can do that. Yeah.
Sam, how do you treat legal advisement and also handling the news section?
Well, advisement is a responsibility. As a faculty member, you're responsible for advising. Even though you don't get load credit for it, I personally, and the committee may feel differently, I would tend to talk about my teaching and advising as kind of one in the category 1, but also in category 3. If you're, let's say you're an advisor to a student group, for example, or you've done a lot of work with students around a particular issue that you don't get load credit for, that should probably be reflected in category 3. We all write letters of recommendation. I mean, that's part of our job as a faculty member, so I guess you need to think about, are you doing something above and beyond what would be expected either in your discipline or in general as a faculty member around that? I guess I would ask myself that question before I...
It may be that you're in the department, you in the department are the go-to person for
Yeah.
all the students
Right.
because you're a good advisor.
Yeah.
Then that's worth
Yeah.
making that point. I want to mention